All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to a valued conversation, the next spoken word. Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what we've got going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do, and subscribe if this is what you're looking for. All right, let's go ahead and kick it for a minute. Let's go ahead and step with Nas. All right, kick it. 1995 cut. No guns, no knives, right? Speak on it. Let's go ahead and bring this down and get into it. We got a little bit of information that's more than a lot to get to tonight. So just in case, if you see something black and buzzing around, it's a fly because the dog left the door open. As I tell this lie. Anyway, it'll be a fly, right? So if I look around or swat occasionally, that's what's going on. All right, again, so I appreciate everyone for joining me. The topic for tonight, the curious case of FBA. Let me tell you right now, this FBA stuff is a cancer. Never have I seen a group of people comprised of folks based around this unintellectual conversation, unrealistic conversation of history, of lineage, of icons, legacies, none of what they have, none of what they possess. But yet they seem intent on trying to usurp history that has already been put in place, history that is recognized to be that of African Americans, African American descendants, who we have African American ancestors who were themselves descended from enslaved Africans brought over in forced immigration by malice, by violence, and by the sharp tongue of a bullwhip taken from Africa. So again, these folks, for some reason, have got it in their heads that they are the original folks of America. A good portion of them believing that the black race, Africans, are indigenous to North America. There's a whole group that breaks off from this. Again, you've got the foundation of Black Americans already believing that they themselves are the rightful heirs to reparations. Nothing can be found in history ever done by anyone identifying as FBA, but yet they feel that reparations is something that they can come out of nowhere. I mean, literally think of this: juveniles who show up and believe that they can sit at the head of the table with no work put in. That's FBA. Maybe we may have a few of them show up tonight, maybe not, but nonetheless, if they do, We're just going to go ahead and continue doing what we're doing, putting it down because this is how it is. FBA has no history. FBA has no legacy. They have no icons. They have nothing unless they attempt to, as I like to say, self-tether themselves to African Americans with distinction. Specifically, to use their word, tethering themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinction who've already established themselves in history with prominence from helping build the foundation of the country that we all exist in. Yeah, they think that they did this. But we'll get into that as we go along, all right? We'll get into this. So, as we already know, I say this at the beginning of just about every show. I don't look to draw a lot of large crowds. Matter of fact, the majority of people that come find me generally do so after the live. At times, I will make offline content that I'll post later, but nonetheless, I'm going to get better at chopping things into shorts, which is what I've started doing. So if you don't catch it live, don't worry about it. You can always catch it again. But when you do catch it again, I'm going to make sure that I've got it segmented. So if there's something that you're looking for in particular, you can go directly to it as opposed to having to sit through the entire thing and skip through wondering what's going to be said. So I'm going to go ahead and make that a little bit easier. So let's do this. We're going to go ahead and kill Nas here in the back for a minute. All right. So the other thing that I want to do is make sure that if there's any type of issue anyone has with what I'm saying, I want you to stop and think about what you're listening to. And then remember, what I say is not directly intended to cause anyone to take offense, but I want you to take a moment to think past what it is that you know, what it is that you understand, and pretty much how you view things. So again, as I said, I'm going to try and do this at the beginning of every show from here and now on. Now, this concept I have, the circle, I've gotten this from Dr. Ray Hagins. Now, Dr. Ray Hagins is a former preacher, and he's also a psychologist. How does that work, right? Well, he preached for 25 years the gospel until he realized that, in his own words, it was all a lie. His words again, there's no Jesus. Jesus never existed. Again, his words. Now, him having gone to the Evangelical Teacher Training Association, he knew all the tactics it took to get someone into the pews. One of the things that he always talked about is that they were taught in order to get someone saved or found, the first thing you had to do is get them lost. Now, looking at that concept, we've got a lot of lost Black folks right now. Again, Black folks who don't acknowledge their heritage coming from Africa. Black folks who think that the African, that the African is native and aboriginal to North America. You've got Black folks who literally believe, just like FBA believes in their nonsense, you've got Black folks who literally believe that not a single slave ship left Africa. I kid you not. We'll probably have a show on that coming up here. And then last but not least, these Blacks who think that we are aboriginal and indigenous to North America believe themselves to be Native Americans, Native Black or Aboriginal Black. It's a whole assortment of nonsense. But yes, you have those folks whom some of my other Pan-Africanists refer to as being pretendians. But getting back to that, all that is just experience and exposure that people have in their lives that, for whatever reason, has come to be the bedrock of their basic core of, we'll say, belief. So again, we'll go ahead and put this up. Inside of this circle exists my anecdotal, lived experience and exposure I've based my life on. Just because John says something I do not agree with doesn't make me an idiot or John a liar. It means I am unfamiliar with what's being discussed. Now, again, each time we get to a point where you're having an issue with what I'm saying, just put your circle up. If need be, I'll put it up for you. Hell, I'll put it up if, let's say, I'm seeing something in the chat that doesn't make any sense to me, but I will have to stop and think, okay, maybe it's something that I'm not familiar with. I need to give it some time, take a moment, take a look for myself before I pass any judgment. But then again, there's some things that we know, and forgive me, folks, I may lose myself a few times here and there tonight, but we know that some things are bullshit. And we know I'm not going to sit around and have anything like that come across this panel. I'm not going to entertain absolute nonsense that's indicative right off the bat. So let's keep that in mind, all right? All right, moving forward. I think what I'm going to do here is just share a few panels first before we really get into this. All right, so this is a clip that I released earlier, I believe it was this week. And the title of that was FBA and Pan-Africanism are adversaries, not acquaintances. Now, the reason that I phrase it as such is because I've noticed that there are some Black content creators who supposedly call themselves Pan-Africanists. Again, Pan-African meaning that there's supposed to be unity amongst the diaspora, Jamaica, Haiti, Brazil, the US, Africa in and of itself. All of us are encompassing, moving towards the same goal. African unity, Pan-Africanism, to represent that. Not saying that one is better than the other, but all doing this in unity. But you've got folks, for whatever reason, have come up with this fusion Pan-Africanism, where they're trying to mix the FBA ideology, which is anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is divisive, which pretty much claims that immigrants are driving down wages, they're making America worse than what it was before, they're taking jobs. The same type of nonsense that you would hear from white supremacist circles is what you're getting from Black folks. Yeah, Black folks, the same shade as I am. These folks have got some type of, I guess, some pseudo jingoism, some type of fanatical patriotism that they've created, and they've built an ideology around. But we'll get into that. Well, excuse me, we'll get into that in a second. But nonetheless, that's what this video was about, addressing that. But along the way, I got an individual that trailed me for a good portion of the day, and I entertained myself. I came out of the job, checked the phone every now and then, and I kept throwing some things out here just to keep him answering, to see what type of nonsense he would come up with. But we'll see that in just a moment. All right, but let me just go ahead and tell you right now, it's a quick video. I want you to listen to what's being said, and then we'll probably come back and I'll go through some of the comments that I went back and forth with this FBA individual. All right, fair use, fair use. What's good, everybody? Welcome to a valued fact drop. Well, it has finally happened. Someone is trying to bridge FBA ideology with Pan-Africanism, which we know it just doesn't work that way, because both are competing ideologies. FBA has anti-Black immigrant rhetoric that they steadily push out, whereas Pan-Africanism is about encompassing anyone and everyone from the diaspora. Because how are we going to unify if we look at separatist type of behavior that you do see from FBA? All right, I want you to consider that, folks. If you want to know more about this, read through what I've got inside of my search bar here. All right, so is foundation of Black American ideology divisive towards Black immigrants? Of course it is. As I said before in many of my videos, you're talking about anti-immigrant, xenophobic, this hate rhetoric because of the belief that they're trying to come over here and act like they're Black, or they want to try and live the Black experience but not being Black. And that's not the case, because you can take the average Black person who considers himself FBA out of America, put them any place else in the world, and somebody will still most likely call them nigger. So therefore, what makes you different? What makes you specific? Why are you discriminating against someone you should be uniting with? But you can't teach that to these folks because of the fact that they've got this, what I call self-tethering ideology, whereas they try and say that, oh, these tethers are coming over here and trying to live off the backs of FBA who have a unique experience, when in fact, this FBA in a self-tethering mindset who is trying to create a history off the backs of African Americans who have already gone forward and taken their place of prominence in history. Think about that. All right, so we hear folks talk about whether or not nationalism supersede Pan Africanism. Dr. John Henry Clark once stated that yes, there should be a sense of nationalism, not just blanket nationalism, which is a broad ideology, prioritizing the interests and sovereignty of a nation state or of a people, meaning FBA. It should be African nationalism, something that encompasses everyone in the diaspora. So therefore, we take 10 people from 10 states and they have one meeting to come across ideas of how we should move together, not 10 people from 10 different states coming up with ideas within their states and then going to a meeting and then arguing about whose idea do we follow. We all need to be together at the same table. So take that home with you, folks. I need you to think about this so we don't have any issues where we run across each other with this fusion of nonsense. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. All right, there you have it. So it's a good, get out of here. So it is a good, clean message that I put forth. Unfortunately, again, when you talk and try and deal with these FBA acolytes, you're going to get some pretty unintelligible and downright stupid commentary. Mad ignorant. So one of the things that I always notice when you start having the conversation with these guys is that they always have an issue with the term African American. I'm not African. I'm FBA. I'm a foundational Black American. My people have been here since slavery. Your people have not been any place. If anything, the legacy and history of FBA and ADOS, American descendant of slaves, goes back 30, maybe we'll give it 40 years, no more than 40 years. But somehow, and I have no doubt there haven't been FBA, for lack of a better word, acolytes, agents, whoever you want to call them, who have been doing their best to make sure that there are search engines that pull up FBA. Make sure that it's one of these things that pop out. If anything, FBA behind itself is typed in, it's one of the first things that's pulled up. Yes, it is a real thing, a thing of ignorance. You've got folks claiming that, yeah, I'm foundational Black American. Yeah, my people were here before slavery. And that's a lot of stuff that just irritates the F out of me when I think about this, because when you talk about Blacks who were here before slavery, you're not talking about Blacks who are native to the land, per se. I mean, who were born in America because Blacks come from America. We do not come from America. We are not indigenous to North America. But what more so that these guys don't understand, because history has not always made it clear, if there were any Blacks who were in North America before chattel slavery, it was because they were either explorers who had come with other nations, possible explorers with African countries, which again, there's not been too many instances of that other than, what's been mentioned by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. They came before Columbus, which a lot of people still dispute now. And then you also have the slaves who were in the Southern Hemisphere. Now, remember, for those of you who've been following me, slavery came last to North America. But first, it came to the Southern Hemisphere. Brazil, Jamaica, Haiti. That's where you would find Spanish colonies. And in Brazil, I believe they had the Portuguese colonies. If there were any Blacks who set foot on North America before slavery in America from the transatlantic slave trade, it was because they were brought up and left from failed Spanish colonies. And then you also had some who may have escaped and found their way to North America through their own means. But don't for a minute ever believe that Blacks are native to North America. That is some foundational Black bullshit. Pardon my language. So as I said, there was a whole lot that was going on in the commentary. I think I had one from this guy, Rich too. Speaking of Willie Lynch, so everyone has heard the Willie Lynch letters if you follow anything, right? Not validated as being a true person or even what went on here with the whole Willie Lynch conversation, but you have a lot of folks who still push that. Now, I didn't really follow this when this guy dropped it off here. This was after my back and forth with, here's this guy's name here, Ty234. This guy just kept on and on. And again, because of the fact I wanted to see how far his ignorance in FBA went, I kept replying back to it, putting in some facts. Well, I can't say just putting in some, dropping some absolute facts that were always countered with this FBA scientific pseudo nonsensical garbage. But they swear, excuse me, they swear they are intellectuals. This guy even went so far as saying that Dr. John Henrik Clarke was a pseudo intellectual. Now, anyone who knows John Henrik Clarke, one of the great master teachers who's passed on, know that his work and research is revered. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that even though he was called Dr. Clarke, he was, I guess, a doctor emeritus, where he'd been given honorary titles. He'd actually gotten himself a doctorate towards the end of his life. It was from an unaccredited university, but nonetheless, he did achieve that. But still, be that as it may, even though his degree may not have been accredited, his work was and still is, and is spoken of by those who have their degrees from accredited universities, people who are of equivalence in prominence for their knowledge of African history, to include Egyptian history, Egyptologists. But again, this guy named Ty took it upon himself to say that Dr. Clarke was a pseudo-intellectual, but yet believes all the nonsense from Tariq Nasheed about foundational Black Americanism, right? Moving on. So, have you ever heard of a phrase called Gish Gallop? I tell you what, let's do this before we go through some of these comments, because the guy left about, let's say, out of 57 comments, I maybe commented 8, maybe 9 times, but all the rest were his. Just ping-ponging one from the other, trying to find steady ground, just throwing shit against the wall. All right, so before we do that, let me go ahead and change the view here. So I don't have any audio on, so I'm just going to go ahead and share the entire screen as is. All right, the definition of Gish Gallop. A Gish Gallop is a rhetorical technique where a speaker overwhelms an opponent by presenting an excessive number of arguments, half-truths, and lies in a rapid, continuous stream. The goal is to make it impossible to refute every point in real time, focusing on quantity rather than quality to create a false impression of superiority. Now, as I said, I maybe replied 8, well, you know what, let's be fair, let's say 10. Maybe I replied 10 times. Now, out of 57 comments, including mine, that would mean 46 of those would have been his. And the one comment that was not from either him or myself would have been the first guy pointed out in the stream. So we're talking about 46 comments that this guy laid out over the course of the day, and he was off on damn near, if not all of them. So where did Gish Gallop come from? It was coined by Eugenie Scott in 1994. It was named after creationist Duane Gish, who frequently used this technique in debates against proponents of evolution. So what you'll get is someone who'll say, oh, so what can you tell me about this? Well, let me ask you this. And when the person begins to answer the second question, well, you know what? Tell me this. And if the person doesn't pay attention to what's happening and attempts to yet jump to another question to answer, oh, hey, hold up. Let me ask you something. And it just continues on and on and on till this individual has gished himself all the way up with an inordinate amount of questions and then walks with, yeah, I stumped him. No, you didn't. You just showed how ignorant you were by asking and not waiting to have it answered because you did not want to be refuted. So that's the primary technique when someone gishes numerous questions at you. Think about this if you've never been to a debate or if you're just having a conversation with someone and the topic just keeps changing and changing. They don't want to be refuted. So therefore, if there's something that they're putting out that has the possibility of being refuted, they'll ask something else to throw you off, and they'll keep asking. So as long as you can't refute what they're putting out, to them, they've won something. Here we go. The tactic. The speaker gallops through numerous weak or irrelevant arguments or non sequiturs to overwhelm the opponent. And this is explained in a few other places here. Cambridge Dictionary being one of them. The goal is designed to waste the opponent's time and, to an uninformed audience, make the opponent appear unable to respond to the flurry of claims. And that's generally what you get with a Gish Gallop when you're having a conversation with these FBA guys. They will jump from, well, we were the ones who founded America to, well, hey, here's something scientific. You want to hear this? And then they'll go to, well, you guys are just tethers. And then it goes from their supposed lineage, which doesn't exist. All right. There's no lineage because the furthest they go back, as I said before, is 40 years. If we're being gracious here, ADOS and FBA have no history. They have no legacy. They have no icons unless they tether themselves, using their word, to the backs of African Americans with distinction who have actually done the work in the country and helped build the foundation of America. They have nothing unless they hang on to the backs of African Americans, period. Now, I'm going to say that multiple times throughout the night. Maybe we'll get lucky to have one of these FBA cats come through here. And I just want you to look at what comes out of their mouths in the chat. But going forward, again, it's a time waste. They don't want to be refuted in what they're saying. They'll ask numerous questions, and then they'll jump from different subject, one subject after the other, making no sense. But to them, they put it down. They've stood on business. But I will guarantee you, as I sit here right now, not a single individual who was our shade of brown or my shade of brown, a slave, not a single person as a slave identified as FBA, not one on a plantation. FBA never worked a day of slavery. There's nowhere in the history books where anyone has been identified as that, but yet they believe they're entitled to reparations. So anyhow, that is the definition of Gish Gallop. There's a little more here, but not a lot. But I want you guys to just take a time. If you want to know more about it, just type in Gish Gallop and see what comes back. So having said that, let's go ahead and just look at some of the stuff that came out of Tyree's mouth. Sounds just like your tether babble. So if you're wondering what is tether, again, tether is something that someone ingeniously came up with, which has to do with tying yourself to something. So when they call non-FBA tether, what they're trying to say is that you are someone who has tethered yourself to FBA prominence, that you're trying to ride the coattails of FBA because of the fact they are unique and distinct people who have a rich culture in the United States. They do not. As I said before, the only way FBA could have a rich and unique culture is if they're trying to, which is what they're doing, usurp what has already been put in place, which is the culture of African Americans. But at the same time, they don't like any other Black that is not American Black, Haitian, Caribbean, African, Jamaican, because they believe that these folks are coming over here, taking the jobs, lowering wages. Again, all the stuff that you would hear from white supremacists. So it's bad enough that in America, we've had to fight slavery, we had to fight racism, we had to fight the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Knights, you name it. But then all of a sudden we have to turn around and fight each other. More conversation to be had. So what you'll get from them is, oh, that's just tether babble. Again, tether being people who are not FBA, and these are going to be Blacks who come in from different countries, or if you're born here, blacks who do not subscribe to this FBA nonsense. So therefore, again, what you're doing is you're trying to latch on to our great heritage and act as if you're black and live the black experience without being black. Oh, tethers hate us. And I said this in one of my other streams and possibly on TikTok, where I stated that we all have family members that sometimes we don't get along with these folks. We may have a bit of a hard time with them, but eventually everything works itself out. We get back to normal. Bygones are bygones. But no, not with FBA when it comes to looking at anyone who is not born, as they say, as a slave, or should I say, be able to trace their lineage back to slavery, which is the damnedest dumb thing I've ever heard. Who are your peoples? Well, you're not entitled to reparations unless you can trace your lineage back to slavery. Well, first of all, who put it in your court to be so specific, to again create an ideology that is exclusionary, which is what it is? As I said, it's some type of pseudo-jingoism, fanatical patriotism. We'll look at that here in just a second. That's been carved out to where these folks actually believe that they are unique in a world full of blacks, believing that, well, we have a unique experience of being in America. To which I recall Dr. John Henry Clark making a statement that this unique experience that blacks feel that they have because of the fact that the boat dropped our ancestors off in America is nothing more than variance, because this unique experience that you would like to speak about in America is the same experience that is found in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Haiti, and any other place, including Brazil. Don't let me leave that out here, but including Brazil. These are places where folks would claim, well, we have a unique experience too. And again, I bet you money, you take that unique experience away and you put them in any other place with a racist, they will still be a nigger to somebody. So this whole thing of, oh, we're unique. No, we're not unique. We're different in the sense that we were dropped off, or should I say our ancestors were dropped off in America. On top of that, slavery reached North America last, which means that we shouldn't even be, as Americans, or should I say FBA, shouldn't be talking about reparations. Number one, you're not African. Remember, oh, I was born in America. My history starts in America. But yet you negate the fact that my history, whether you want to acknowledge it about or not, is the same history as yours. The difference is I acknowledge that Africa is the homeland. Even though I may never live there, it doesn't necessarily mean that my knowledge is not of there. This is just stone cold patent foolery to believe that you can separate yourself from your culture just because you say so. So tether babble. Now that is something that you will get from a lot of these FBA guys. Oh, just another tether out here babbling. So I said, okay, let's have a definition to this. So this is something I put together. Tether babble. The obligatory response projected by menticidal FBA acolytes upon realization that hypocritical self-tethered confirmation bias has been crushed by Pan-African prominence and empirical evidence, which is generally the case here. As soon as you dispel any nonsense, or if they don't like what they're hearing, that's where the gish gallop begins. Well, let me tell you something. Do you know what this is? Do you know what this enzyme and axime is? And then if you don't bite, they'll continue throwing stuff out to see what they can put out there into the ether. So I generally like to make sure that my signature block has the following. Of course, my name, where you can find me, but the best part to me is making sure that it's always known. FBA has no history. FBA has no icons. FBA has no legacy. Obviously, I left a note out, but I'll go fix that later. And then self-tethered menticide. Now, when I say self-tethered, what I'm saying is that these guys have roped their own nonsense around their own necks. Tethered meaning rope, time. So they have self-tethered themselves with this ignorance. Now, you've got to be some type of special to actually believe that you're going to show up. You've only been around for 15, 20, let's say max 40 years, but yet you think you're going to take 200 and some odd plus years of African American history and claim it as your own. That is a sickness, folks. So from here, I would have to agree that there's no evidence about Willie Lynch. So that was never an issue I had. So I don't know why he's responding to me, because I wasn't the one who said anything about Willie Lynch. I know that is not true. But still, he went about it to himself to explain something to show that, oh, that's a lie, and look at it from a perspective that I didn't know any better. Okay, fine. Again, I have no issue with anyone attempting to clarify anything. But the thing is that if you're going to clarify something, it needs to be relative and something that is generally accepted throughout, not just in your echo chamber. Oh, well, here's something good here. I destroyed you. You have, I guess you meant to say, you have no understanding about anything historical. Now, anyone who's followed my show knows that I get in on some history here, but nonetheless, this is someone who doesn't know me, but saw this video that I played before and lost his shit because of the fact that there's nothing about FBA that is real, that is true, that is historical. None of that. Again, FBA has no history, no icons, no legacy, nothing. But yet, if they claim that they do have it, it's something that they are trying to usurp from recorded history that already exists. I dropped a question to one of these guys who was gishing on one of my other shows. Didn't give me an answer. I made it clear. Show me one prominent FBA icon that has not already been recorded in history as being an African American with distinction. Booker T. Washington, Thurgood Marshall, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Shirley Chisholm, somebody like that. Give me a name. And of course, they just gished over to something else. FBA has no icons. Remember that. So anyway, what the guy took upon himself to say is that Dr. Clark was a pseudo-intellectual. I destroyed you. I guess he's trying to say you have no understanding about anything historical. You just regurgitate pseudoscience. John Henry Clark, calling him a doctor is like Dr. Dre or Dr. Seuss. You can't even spell Dr. Seuss right. This is FBA, pan scammers. So we'll get to something here in a moment where I show you some of the accomplishments of Dr. John Henry Clark. Now, he was a doctor emeritus, which means that he had a lot of honorary titles, but he did teach at institutions of higher learning. He did do this because of the work he did in Black history, bringing it to prominence, making it known that there were a myriad of areas that were suppressed throughout history based upon scientific racism that you found mostly during the 18th and 19th century that still defines a lot of information that you do not know about Africa or Blacks in and of themselves, because of the fact, oh no, we just can't let it be seen that Africans were capable of producing such X and Y. We can't let it be known because it would contradict the lie that has been told of them being savage, oversexed savages. That is the general picture that has been planted. And for anything else to show that there was a level of prominence that came from Africa, which there did, it would contradict the message. Now, another thing that a fair amount of FBA does not know, and I have no qualms in saying this, they don't realize that Africans have been enslaved since the 7th century, not just in Africa, but taken from Africa to the Arabian Peninsula. The Arabs were the first folks to enslave the Africans. And a lot of folks don't realize that. Of course, then you also had the Spanish and the Portuguese. Spain was taking Africans from the continent and taking them to Spain to be slaves. There was a large amount of blacks. There I said there was a population of blacks that existed in Iberia before it became known as Spain and Portugal that no one truly knows in, I don't know, we'll call it what mainstream history is taught in schools. They don't teach that. And in some colleges, you may not get that unless you go to a specialized course. Dr. Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, Dr. John G. Jackson, Dr. Amos Williams, Wilson. I confuse that sometimes with Chancellor Williams as a doctor also. Sheikh Anta Diop, numerous blacks of prominence who taught African history, who made it known that there was history that we as Africans had. Dr. Clark mentioned before that when he was a young man in his late teens, maybe early 20s, and asked the question to someone he worked with, how do I get more information about my people? The guy told him, you come from people who have no history. But maybe if you work hard enough, you might be a great Negro like W.E. Du Bois, or Du Bois, as people say. I've heard it both ways. But that is really what set the fire under Dr. Clark. But still, be that as it may, this individual, this Ty 234, had the audacity to say that this man taught pseudoscience when there are virtually numerous lectures, even on YouTube, that you can find from Dr. Clark and from his contemporaries. He was anything but a pseudo-intellectual. But again, as you can see, I supposedly was destroyed by this guy who can't spell or who can't really formulate any decent idea, much less use proper grammar. John Henrik Clark did not earn a formal doctorate from an accredited university. Okay? As I said, your point being, he may not have earned his degree from an accredited university, but he did earn one. And if you want to hang your hat on that, I made mention of this somewhere in the article, should I say, excuse me, in the chat here. His work has been verified. It's been validated. It's been accredited, not to mention, again, accredited by people with degrees from accredited universities who stand behind what Dr. Clark put forward because it was substantiated by other African history specialists, so to speak. What he brought forward was corroborated. But only with FBA, we have people who have the audacity to say, oh, he didn't know anything. He was a pseudo-intellectual. So I said something here along with, this is the only accurate comment you've made as of now. This was speaking towards his Willie Lynch comment. And I made sure to let him know it's not flattering that this is all you know, because that was the one thing that was accurate through his entire gish. Of course, I went into my thing talking about his self-tethered pivot, pretty much verifying and accrediting the work of Dr. Clark was done by his peers. Now, I've already mentioned that, but it just goes on and on. Notably, he became a professor without even finishing high school, which was described as highly unusual. Yes, it was highly unusual that a man who didn't finish high school went on to achieve notoriety, went on to become one of the greatest African-American historians there was, who had people who had actually gone to school, gotten their doctorates, who revered him as a peer. But if you can't find something to say, you make noise over just about anything to draw people's attention. What else do we have? Oh, it's not a thing. That's the definition you would have, which would, again, I can't half the time. I don't know what this guy is trying to say. I forgot. Oh, here we go. I said, you believing FBA is an actual thing as compared to the verifiable work of a Dr. Emeritus providing validated historical information from his peers who've accredited his contributions is indicative of the menticidal self-tethered IQ you've presented. Maybe I do need to put my glasses on. But anyway, his response, it's not a thing. That's you definition, meaning he meant to say your. That's your definition, which would something an exonine name / identity given by an outsider. Its lineage slash ethnicity named by the group in the 9. See how easy that is? Now, remember I said something before about the Gish Gallop, that they'll go from general, well, you can't prove this, or yeah, this is nonsense what you're saying, to a scientific, or dare I say a pseudo-scientific perspective. And then sooner or later they get into the ad hominems. But this is an example of, well, he wasn't making it stick in one area, so let me go ahead and try something scientific, which again, they will generally misuse or use in a particular sense, believing that it makes their point. Context is something that's generally missing from these folks. But again, I'm not going to just go through and read all of them, but I just want you to look at how many responses that this Thai 234 guy had. I mean, look at this. I mean, just running through here, 30 more replies. And in those replies, there are other replies. Just back and forth, just gishing all over the place. There was one guy who pushed back also, Rich 2, when Ty had said something, since when is lineage ideology? And the user Rich29 said, when it's created less than 450 years ago, that's how. But nonetheless, again, you've got multiple responses from this guy, Gish Gallop, right? But that's all I'm going to spend on this. But that's what I want you guys to start paying attention to if you ever find yourself in a conversation, whereas you get asked a question, you begin to answer it, and then, well, let me ask you something. This individual will jump to something else. First, they'll just claim that, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Then once you start refuting whatever they're throwing at you, well, let me give you this. Then they may switch to the pseudo-scientific mental idiot conversation, and then throw a barrage of questions to you in that direction. Then if that doesn't work, well, let me ask you this. Then they'll keep switching, always jumping to something. All right. So again, look at this as being the written format of Gish Gallop. Now, if you'd like to go back and take a look at this, the name of that episode or this clip, FBA and Pan-Africanism are adversaries, not acquaintances. All right, we're almost at an hour here, so let's get stepping. So I think I gave you the definition of Gish Gallop. Now, I think I mentioned something of what pseudo-jingoism is, or let me give you a better definition directly from a definition. Pseudo-jingoism describes a superficial, performative, or insincere form of aggressive nationalism, jingoism. While traditional jingoism is an extreme, often belligerent belief that one's country is superior and should use force to assert itself, sound like the country America is becoming, right? Pseudo-jingoism acts out of these behaviors without deep conviction, often for political, social, or performative gain. It is commonly characterized by performative patriotism, loudly waving flags, using nationalistic rhetoric, or performing gestures of loyalty solely to align with popular sentiment or appear patriotic rather than holding genuine extreme beliefs. That goes to say, you can see a lot of what these FBI guys and gals will go so far as to literally state that you ain't shit. You aren't from this country. Why are you in this country? Why don't you just go back to wherever you came from? And this is what they will say directly to another African descendant or someone directly from Africa, someone from Haiti, someone from the Caribbean, someone from Brazil, someone from the Black diaspora that is not from America. They will say these things to, all the while believing that for whatever reason, they are the chosen ones. When I say they, that's FBA, believing that this unique history that they have that's been created, crafted, manufactured. Think of turning a shit pie into red velvet cake. That's the whole concept. Now, I'm sure if you were to talk about the FBA, they'd feel differently, but I would expect that. Again, those folks are a bona fide cancer to Black unity. Think of them as being the emotional support pets for white supremacists, because they're doing the exact same thing, which is division. Manufactured hostility, constructing an us versus them narrative to silence dissent or target specific groups. Again, those specific groups being anyone who is not from America that supposedly can trace their lineage back to slavery. Now, here's the dumb thing about tracing your lineage back to slavery. You've got some folks who are absolutely proud to say, I'm proud to be a foundational Black American. I can trace my lineage back to slavery. And I thought about it and I said to somebody, you know what? Where's the pride here in being able to trace your lineage through a system that oppressed you, that put you in chains? And the crazier part about this was brought to the United States and implemented by immigrants. These cats are always talking about the Democrats being on the plantation, but yet who is it who's always proud to trace their lineage back to slavery, which puts you where? On a plantation. FBA has no history, no legacy, no icons. Can't say it enough. Shallow aggression, mimicking the hawkish, warlike rhetoric of true jingoism, but often retreating when actual risks or sacrifices are required. Now, I've said this before. When you really bring them down to the wire, two questions. Name someone in history that ever worked on a plantation enslaved during the course of slavery that was identified as FBA. There isn't one. Second question. Name a prominent FBA icon that has not already been recognized in recorded history as an African American with distinction. They can't do that. Again, this is where you get all your gish galloping from. They will gish and gallop. They will talk science, which again will not be verified, but in their minds, for however couple of minutes they may have gone out and found something to come jump in the chat and throw that out there, they will believe that they are speaking something. In essence, it is the adoption of the appearance of a fanatic patriot to fit in, gain power, or intimidate others, rather than being driven by a true belief in the nation's absolute supremacy. There is nothing that has been accomplished by FBA that has not already been discussed inside of African American circles. Now, sure enough, you had some of the ADOS lawyers. Again, you have people who may have a profession, a true profession, who have tried to do a few things here and there. I'm not going to take away from that. You have your efforts that have been made, but ultimately, it's still based upon division. They don't do this for the overall aspect of the Black diaspora. They want to do this just for these folks right here that supposedly, again, think that they are unique and special and nobody else has a history like theirs, when in fact, they don't even have a history unless they're stealing it from African American descendants. So another popular argument that you will hear from these FBA folks is that Pan-Africanism is dead. No one celebrates that. The only Pan-Africanists that exist are in the United States. Again, not true. If Pan-Africanism is something that you don't support, then it will always be something that you will attempt to undermine. If you've got no stock in it, why would you speak highly of it? Again, these are things that can be contradictory in conversation when you speak with them. Step all over themselves. No one does this. No one celebrates Pan-Africanism. Now, I already knew the answer, but I put it in here just for the benefit of anyone who may watch the show and want to ask themselves, is Pan-Africanism seen, celebrated outside of the United States? Yes, it is. Yes, Pan-Africanism is heavily celebrated and practiced outside the United States, particularly in Africa, the Caribbean, and Europe. Funny enough, right? As a global movement for solidarity, economic cooperation, and political unity among people of African descent. Now, remember, I said that Africans were kidnapped and taken to Spain. And from Spain, they began to migrate throughout the European continent. So it's not odd to where if you go to Germany, if you go through Spain, you go to France, you go to Belgium, you name it, Holland, you are going to see Africans over here. People seem to think that all that exists of Africa was roots, or this nonsense where you see blacks out in the sub-Sahara with just loincloths on, carrying spears. Yes, you still have those tribes that exist out there who have decided to shun the ways of the modern world. But then again, you also have Africans who live in cities, or you have business districts, you have financial districts, but those are not the sites that you ever see. were always shown to be diseased, starving, and living in poverty. And that is ideally what is always attempted to be shown, because again, to show anything else strikes down the lie that's been told for 300 or 400 years that they're all brainless savages, half naked. Key regions celebrating Pan-Africanism. Africa, of course. The continent is the primary center of modern Pan-Africanism, with strong movements in Senegal, Burkina Faso, and the DRC. Key events include Accra's Year of Return in Ghana, which aimed to unite continental Africans with the diaspora. The Caribbean. The region has strong historic ties to Pan-African thought, with figures like Marcus Garvey influencing the movement, which still sees momentum in the region. Europe. Pan-Africanism has deep roots in Europe, as I said, because there is a large African population in Europe that you never really hear about. Beginning with the 1900 Pan-African Conference in London, it remains a major hub for solidarity efforts. Institutions and events. The Global Pan-African Movement headquarters is in Kampala, Uganda, and the African Development Bank is headquartered in Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, which is the Ivory Coast. So don't let anyone from FBA try and tell you that, oh, Pan-Africanism is not celebrated. It's dead. As you can see for yourselves, that is not the truth. So one thing I also wanted to do was make sure that if anyone tried to say no one does anything to celebrate Pan-Africanism, no one does any organizations for it, this is a list of all the conferences of Pan-Africanism that have taken place. The most recent one was in Lomé, Togo in 2025. Excuse me. But we can go back starting in 1900, London, 1919, Paris, 1921, London, 1923, London and Lisbon. Just have a look for yourselves, folks. Pan-Africanism is in effect. But of course, being that the FBA is against that, anything and everything they say will be against it. And 9 times out of 10 is going to be a lie. All right, so moving on here, Dr. John Henry Clark. Now, as I mentioned before, Dr. Clark has been one of the most prominent figures in African American history, at least making sure the proper telling of that was done. Now, he grew up poor, but being that he wanted to learn how to read, he took it upon himself finding anything that had words on it to put in his pocket, as he said, and take it with him and try and read it later and try to learn. He mentioned that as he grew older, that he started taking jobs, washing, maybe washing shoes or cleaning shoes, cutting grass, running errands, anything he had to do that would give him the opportunity to make money to buy books. And sometimes he said if he was lucky, he would work for a white family that had a library. And being that he didn't think they used it too often, he would take some of the books. I don't know if he ever gave them back, but he said that's where he got most of his education from in the beginning, by taking books out of the libraries of prominent white people. All right, early life and education. So he grew up poor, but again, he educated himself. And by educating himself, as I said before, and you'd have to watch some of his lectures, which is how I know a good amount of information about him, listening directly to the man speak, and also taking it upon myself to find information that he himself had written. So when he did write his books, he would say that during the course of writing his big books, sometimes he would stop and write small books. So this is just an example of some of the things that he would write. And then, of course, here we go. Not only was just African history and things, aspects about Africa were written about, he'd also take the time to speak about the religion. And again, he's not by himself. You had Cheikh Anta Diop, who we'll probably talk about here in just a moment, who was also known for, prominent in the 40s or 50s and 60s for making it known that Africa had more of a history than was being presented at the time. But let's roll it back here to Dr. Clark for a second. Now, it says here that he was also influenced by Cheikh Anta Diop. And you would see that later on in a lot of his writings that he talked about elements of how Africa had been overlooked, that Sheikh Anta Diop broke onto the scene and said, hey, folks, you need to re-examine this. This is not true. There is history. There is great history over here that needs to be seen. And begrudgingly, folks did follow his lead. But Dr. Clark, in and of himself, made sure that he himself visited Africa. Dare I say, was almost a resident as many times that he'd gone over there and studied directly in areas, mixed in with the populace, befriended folks. He was able to get information directly from people who had substantial information about the African dynasties, about African spirituality, which he spoke of greatly, aspects of Africa that was taken from Africa when the colonization began. Chopped, screwed, remade, and then presented back as if it was something brand new. Now, going back to that conversation I had with that foundational black asshat, forgive my language, positions in academia, let's take a quick read of some of the things that was done during his educational phase. From 1969 to 1986, Clark was a professor of Black and Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College of the City University of New York, where he served as founding chairman of the department. He was also the Carter G. Woodson Distinguished Visiting Professor of African History at Cornell University's Africana Studies and Research Center. Additionally, in 1968, he founded the African Heritage Studies Association and the Black Caucus of the African Studies Association. In its obituary of Clark, the New York Times noted that the activist's ascension to Professor Emeritus at Hunter College was unusual, without benefit of a high school diploma, let alone a PhD. It acknowledged that nobody said Professor Clark wasn't an academic original. And again, the individual that that I presented here, who wanted to use this statement as a negative, again, lacked any understanding of what was being said. Unusual being a thing of, wow, he accomplished all this without a high school diploma? Yes, he did all that because the man was intuitive, the man was sharp, the man was a master of introspect. And having that introspect, having the ability to look at what we all saw in front of us, but did not really understand, he made that clear. In 1994, Clark earned a doctorate from the non-accredited Pacific Western University, now California Miramar University in Los Angeles, having earned a bachelor's degree there in 1992. So he got his bachelor's degree, and then, of course, he also earned a doctorate. I don't know where he earned his master's, if he did earn a master's, but again, he did this late in life. Now, I'm not sure if he did that just to make sure that he was properly credentialed, but he didn't really need to do that because he had already given history credentialed information. Again, if anyone would like to read more about Dr. Clark, Wikipedia is one source, or you can go to YouTube and type in John Henrik Clark's greatest lectures, and you can find information here directly from the man yourself. As I said before, the next person, Sheikh Anta Diop. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time with Sheikh Anta Diop as I did with Dr. Clark, or not spending a combined amount of time with these two individuals, but I just want it to be known here that these two men are prominent in African American history. Sheikh Anta Diop primarily for making things known that never would have been seen had it not been for his intervention. Now, this man was an academic of all sorts. He was an historian, an anthropologist, a physicist even. He was a proponent of what you call an academic scholar. From his writing here, from his bio, the questions he posed about cultural bias in scientific research contributed greatly to the post-colonial turn in the study of African civilizations. Like I said, he was a key proponent in turning around this thought of they're just a bunch of hungry savages. What type of intellect and knowledge can you expect to come out of Africa? But yet, if you go back through the history of Africa, everybody wanted the continent. Everybody wanted to possess Africa. One of the things Dr. Clark talked about is that the recolonization during his time before he passed away in 1998, he was saying that Africa was once again being recolonized. And there is truth in that. I believe the Chinese are over here right now making their inlands in here, along with the French who've been there for decades, the Dutch, even the English, Germans. Everybody from Europe is over in Africa, finding a piece of it that they can mine, or should I say strip mine. Different topic, but understand that in order to get people to recognize the historical assets that came from Africa, it took this man right here to do so, at least to get the ball truly rolling. Again, Shikanta Diop, you can find his information in Wikipedia as well. So when you have to ask the question, how much history of slavery can you learn? I recall that every year in school, up until the time I was in high school, there was always that 2 or 3 weeks of school that got really uncomfortable because you were talking about slavery. But what made it uncomfortable was not the subject matter per se, but it was generally listening to people snicker and make jokes about slavery loud enough to make sure that any black person in the room heard them. I once had a teacher. I'll never forget this. My father had gone to Turkey for a year, being that I'm a brat, as I mentioned before. And we had to come back and stay with our grandparents for about a year while he was, I want to say, in Turkey. So there was this teacher. She did, I want to say that she did, what do you call that in school? Excuse me. I want to keep saying spelling for some reason, but she was responsible for the reading portion of it. I guess she had reading, writing, and arithmetic. She was the reading, writing portion. But I forget what it was that we were talking about one day during the course of Black history, and she was reading something, and she said, Emmanuel, this was the other kid in class, the other black kid in class. It was myself and Emmanuel and about maybe 15 to 20 of the white kids. She started talking about some black guy and a white guy who were friends, but the white guy would sometimes use racial slurs. But she said he would do it in love. Now, Kevin and Emmanuel, my name is Jean Kevin, but he would say Kevin and Emmanuel. When I say this, understand I'm just saying this in love, but the white guy's name will say is Bob, and Tom was the black guy, and I think Tom was a quarterback, and he would throw the ball to Brad, or if I said that was his name, we'll just call the white guy Brad. But nonetheless, he'd throw a bad pass, and then Brad would say, "Tom, that was a typical nigger pass." And she would, oh, these guys were just so colorful with their speech. And I remember Emmanuel and I looking at each other like, what the F? Just simply in the classroom using the word nigger. She used it 2 or 3 other times. But again, this was about 1982, Tennessee, a little school that I went to. So this was the general attitude. They wouldn't call it to our faces, but that's what they thought of us blacks as we walked through there. Now, again, my brother and I were only there temporarily. We didn't grow up in our hometown. We came back occasionally throughout the years. But then we have some friends who grew up there from grade school all the way up to high school. And even some of them attended college together. To a few never left, stayed there, still there their entire lives. But nonetheless, in that point in time, I'm sitting here listening to a woman use the word nigger openly and laugh about it. But that was the time period. But anyway, as I was saying, history at that point in time in school is only talked about from a high 32,000 foot level. They don't really dig into it per se. So again, the question is, does college freshman history cover slavery? because obviously in high school, you don't really have it covered to a certain degree. Yes, college freshman history courses in the United States, particularly American history surveys, extensively cover slavery. Now, when I was going through freshman college in my undergrad years, I took a Black history course and the instructor was white. Now, I say that not to say that, well, can a white guy not really understand Black history? But there's nothing saying that an individual who is trained in history cannot teach history. Now, whether or not history will have the same effect on them, that remains to be seen. But the individual who taught that was well and learned in the concept, but he himself may have spoken about it from, for lack of a better expression, I'll say an artificial term. Not saying that he was being disingenuous, but the the passion was not there, per se, as it would potentially be if someone of the same color as me were to tell it. And then, you know what? I can recall a time, be able to share stories about that. That wasn't the case with this instructor, but nonetheless, he was still a good instructor. Again, history is taught at a greater level, especially slavery, when you go to college. This is something to keep in mind. These courses generally go beyond high school narratives, analyzing slavery's role in shaping the U.S. economy, the creation of the Constitution, and its position as the central cause of civil war. So, so what do we have? All right, so there's a good extensive amount of information here, but we're kind of behind the curve on this. So what I'm going to do is simply say, if there's any more you want to know about it, type the same thing inside of your search bar as you see here and go from there. Now, here's something else that throws me every time you have a conversation with these FBA cats. Again, we have a unique history. We've been here since the beginning. Beginning of what? You've been here as long as everyone else. But the thing is that no one identifies as FBA. But still, they're going to try you on this. So I had to put this in here. Were there any slaves during slavery with paperwork identifying them as foundational Black Americans? Now, I already know what the answer is, but again, you have to use hard evidence with these guys to put them back on their heels, to which again, they'll pivot and start gishing nonetheless. Now, it was known that if any slave was traveling away from the plantation, they had to have their papers on them. Now, as we know, if you've studied history, whether you had your papers or not, your life was up to discretion on what that white person was feeling at the time who stopped you. Now, one thing that Dr. Clark always mentions that you never saw one white guy ever jump one Black guy or ever jump one Indian in a one-on-one. It was always 6 or more, as he stated. Just something to keep in mind here. I mean, when I stop now and think about how I used to love watching Tarzan swing through the jungle, like, are you kidding me? Give me a break. This one white dude on a branch beat up an entire continent. But you wouldn't know any better watching that, right? No. You wouldn't know any better. Who remembers the Dukes of Hazzards? The General Lee. Again, at 8 and 9 years of age, you don't know anything about General Lee, truly. You just know that this car was jumping over ditches and stuff. And everybody loved Bo and Luke Duke. Now, when I look back at it, I can understand why my father used to look at me sideways when I talked about, oh, Dad, I wish I could have the General Lee. We'll leave it right there. All right, let's read a couple of things. Documentation type. Oh, let me back up for a second. No, enslaved people did not have paperwork identifying them as foundational Black Americans, FBA, as this is a modern term created around 2019, 2020 to describe the descendants of enslaved people in the U.S. During slavery, records mainly identified individuals as property, often nameless or listed only by given name, gender, and age. So that's pretty much all I need to say about this. So anytime anyone talks about we have a rich history, show me. Give me something that states that FBA has been here. They can't do it. Moving on. Now, this goes to the conversation that you get from FBAs who make the statement that, oh, well, my people were here before slavery. Oh, blacks are indigenous to North America. We've always been here. We were here before they were. Well, okay, wait a minute. So would you take it upon yourself to say that we were here before the Native American? Ooh, that's when it gets sticky. Well, my grandmama says that, that we're half Cherokee. That so yeah, I was here before they got here, or we were here together. Now, this goes back to the blacks who claim that blacks are native black or Native Americans. We are Aboriginal. We are native to the continent. Absolute foolery. So again, you have to be specific about how you ask questions. Blacks in North America before chattel slavery were from failed Spanish colonies or exploration parties of other nations. Survey says, yes, that is accurate. Before the establishment of widespread chattel slavery in the English North American colonies, symbolized by the 1619 arrival in Jamestown, people of African descent were present in North America as early as the 16th century, often accompanying Spanish exploration parties or part of failed Spanish colonial attempts. Now, within this thing of, oh, well, we were here before slavery in America, you get this confusion of the freedmen versus the Maroons. Now, no matter how you look at this, any black person, as it says right here, any African that was on this continent before chattel slavery, 9 times out of 10 was an African slave who spoke Spanish that was brought up from a Spanish colony that failed in the US. So when these colonies failed, either through starvation, mismanagement, disease, or revolt, the Spanish folks stayed as long as they could and said, you know what, the hell with this. You ninjas can stay here, and left the blacks. So what do you think they did? Well, they more or less were found wandering in the woods by the local Indian populace, and these folks were taken in. Hence, that's where you get the, oh, my folks are Cherokee. No, your folks are not Cherokee. Yes, you had Africans who had mixed in with the culture, but keep in mind, again, these blacks were not indigenous to the land. They were brought here. Now, when you talk about blacks being here before slavery, we're talking about blacks being here 200 years before what we're discussing right now. It was an exploration. This is where you had blacks who were recorded by Mexicans who supposedly came to the New World or the United States, or excuse me, Mexico, North America, 200 years before Columbus. So in 1974, there were some almond heads made of brass, of copper, that was discovered in a site. I want to say brass or copper, but still there were heads that resembled the look and appearance of Africans that looked similar to the statues that you found in the African continent. Now, as was told to Columbus, supposedly, in his writings, the natives said that these dark-skinned, I'll say travelers right now, or explorers, came from the South. And they also were they were finely dressed. I don't know what words that the natives were using, but said that they had a particular dress of clothes, and they also had gold-tipped spears. Now, when you go back and take a look at this description, you'll find that the people in the Guinea region of Africa were known to, again, they dress in good clothes, Sunday best, what do you want to call it, but they also carried gold-tipped spears. Now, people don't like to acknowledge this fact, and as much we'll say credit that's been given to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima in his profession as being in academia, there are still folks who say, oh, this is just hogwash to believe that Africans actually came to America before Columbus. Again, this is something that is not willing to be negotiated upon because blacks can't sell boats, which is a lie. Look up the Kufu, Kufu. This is supposedly one of the boats or a boat that actually made it from Africa to the New World. Now, if I need to, just to make sure that I'm a little bit more clear on this, I'll probably look at doing a show that will look more at African exploration by sea. But nonetheless, these are the folks that are believed to have visited North America 200 years before Columbus. Now, the thing here to get back on track of what I'm talking about is that these folks were explorers. Nobody stayed there. As I said before, and as it says right here, if you would find anyone who had explored North America as an African, it would have been because they themselves were with that exploration party, or they were part of a slave ship that came from the southern colonies, again, Spain, Portugal. Not that there was too much, Portuguese from Brazil. Not that there were too many of those, but still, this is where these blacks would have come from. They would have been left on North American soil and forced to fend for themselves. And luckily enough, the local Indian population took them in. Of course, there's intermixing and intermarrying, and therefore you have blacks now today who are back to the particular phenotype that I am, who do not look Indian, but will tell you there's Indian in my family. No, blacks are not indigenous to North America. First recorded Africans. The first documented African to arrive in the continental United States was Juan Garrido, a free black conquistador who accompanied Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon to Florida in 1513. Now, if I recall correctly, Ponce de Leon, or no, take it back, or was it Cortez? We're looking for the fountain of youth. I can't recall, but I do know that in school there was a book where we had a chapter speaking about how the conquistadors had been in America, but not a lot was given to as far as attention on that. Failed Spanish colonies, 1526. In 1526, a Spanish expedition attempted to establish a colony in what is now South Carolina, Georgia, San Miguel de Guadalupe. Nearly 100 enslaved Africans were brought along. They rebelled, making it impossible for the Spanish to sustain the colony, after which they vanished into the interior. Hence what I was just saying, that they went into the countryside, the local Indian populace found them, the rest is history. Spanish explorations, 1520s to the 1530s. Estevanico Esteban, a Moroccan slave, was part of the disastrous 1527 Narvaez expedition to the Gulf of Mexico. He survived as one of only 4 people out of hundreds to endure an 8-year journey on foot from Florida to Mexico, acting as an explorer, interpreter, and scout. Black conquistadors. In the early 1500s, numerous black men, some free, some enslaved, acted as soldiers and laborers in Spanish conquest, exploring Florida, the Southwest, and Mesoamerica with figures like Ponce de Leon, Hernan Cortez, I just mentioned, and Hernando de Soto, and other nations. Enslaved Africans were also part of English efforts to settle the Americas before 1619. Sir Francis Drake's fleet, which stopped at Roanoke Island in 1586, had previously raided Spanish slave ships and had Africans on board. So as I said before, folks, do not let anyone from FBA try and tell you, we was here, cuz we was here before y'all. No, we were not. And seen. All right, moving on still. Now, remember a moment ago, I just mentioned about there were 2 types of folks that hit the block before chattel slavery. You have the freedmen, or let me refer that. You have 2 types of blacks. One was on the shoreline before chattel slavery. One came after chattel slavery had been established. That would be the freedmen. Now, the whole purpose why they're called freedmen is because they were freed from slavery, from enslavement. You had the maroons, who were, now keep in mind, maroon was a Spanish word for wild or unkept. And then there was also the word cimarroons, which was, I think it meant burnt or something like that. But nonetheless, the maroons that people talk about who escaped and ran into the woods and survived and built communities, these were the Maroons. But what people seem to not understand is that these folks were not indigenous to North America. Not to mention, they were here before chattel slavery, meaning that they were not free, so to speak. They came as slaves, but after being abandoned by the Spanish or the Portuguese, they had their freedom until chattel slavery. And then the whole concept of freed blacks began to be phased out in favor of, you know what, we need more workers. So I don't care if you have papers, into slavery you go. I think there's a couple of tabs, or maybe one in particular, that may discuss this, but pulling it back, freedmen were different from Maroons. Yes, freedmen and Maroons were distinct groups in the history of slavery, differing primarily in how they attained their freedom and their relationship with slave holding societies. So there was, again, a lot of confusion that people have with freedmen versus Maroons. Again, freedmen did not show up to the country free. No, freedmen were people who had been under the institution of slavery, who had either been given their freedom, they worked for their freedom, or in the end, when the Civil War was won, slavery was abolished, thereby granting them their freedom. So you had three phases that this came in. Excuse me. Maroons were enslaved people who escaped bondage and created their own autonomous communities in remote areas such as mountains, swamps, or forests. Freedmen were individuals who were released from slavery, as I was just saying, through legal means such as manumission granted by the owner, self-purchase, or formal emancipation. So the differences here, we'll run through a few of these. Method of freedom. Maroons self-liberated. They took their freedom by force or escape, often immediately upon arrival or after experiencing extreme abuse. They were considered wild or untamed, with their name derived from the Spanish Cimarrones. So again, it kills me how FBA says I can trace my lineage back to slavery. And if you can't trace your lineage back to slavery, then you are not a foundational American. You are not entitled to reparations. But remember, this rhetoric they speak is anti-Black, meaning that, oh, well, no, if you're not pure Black, if you are not a person who had family that was here during the course of slavery, you can't claim reparations. Now, here's the ignorance in these guys. Once again, Africans were brought to this country, okay, immigrants. But as I said before, America was the last place to get slaves. Slaves in the New World or in the Western Hemisphere went to the southern side of town, Haiti, the Caribbean, Jamaica, Brazil, South America, so to speak. These are the places where Africans first came. America was the last. So that being said, all throughout the course of history, when you listen to FBA talk about, well, I can trace my so-and-so back to here, again, so what? You're not the only one. You do not have this proud, unique history, because your unique history is the same as anyone else who can trace their lineage back to slavery. But the thing is that once you find that ancestor, it goes past that. If you look at who was the ancestor of this particular ancestor, and you continue tracing that to where you see that this ancestor that you supposedly trace your lineage back to had an African ancestor. Now we're talking about in the 1860s, or at least from we'll say from the 1700s onwards. We talk the second, third, fourth generation. We're talking about still African descendants who had great grandfathers even, who were Africans or still spoke the African tongue. So there's going to be the transition to whereas when the slaves got off the boat, they spoke African, but eventually the transition of the children had by the first generation folks would learn English, but they still could communicate in African with their parents, with their grandparents. And then as they got older and had kids, those kids may be able to speak the African tongue with their parents, their grandparents, great grandparents, and so forth. But at some point in time, that all died out. Now, ideally, massa didn't want them speaking their native tongue. So that may have been abolished. But remember, even though I may not speak my native tongue during the course of the daytime, at night, once the doors are closed, there was probably still the speaking of the native tongue until finally it was no more. But again, rest assured here, these Africans have always been a mixture and a part of slavery, whether it be when we first came to the States or what a lot of people don't realize, the last batch of Africans arrived in America, I want to say April 10th, 1860, and it was in Mobile, Alabama. Now, I reserve the right to be wrong, but please, if you feel the need to, take a look, check it out. 1860, Mobile, Alabama, the last slaves arrived, which means that you had immigrants at the beginning of slavery, and you had immigrants who showed up towards the end of slavery. So again, I can't figure out FBA. How do you think that you can trace your lineage back to slavery when we had immigrants on both sides of the field here? You cannot trace your lineage back to slavery without having Africans. I'm talking about direct from Africa Africans who may not be a part of that. But that's what they'll do. That's the knowledge. Or the lack of knowledge, I should say. Freedmen, again, we just mentioned this, legally freed. They were generally freed by official legal documentation. Way of life and location. Maroons lived in hidden independent communities such as palinques, or quilombos in the outskirts of society, often fighting guerrilla wars to maintain their independence. Excuse me if I'm not pronouncing that right. Freedmen often lived within the existing social structure, sometimes in cities or near plantations, and were subject to specific restrictive laws governing their conduct. So again, there's more to it here, but I'll just leave it right there. Just understand here that the biggest difference here is that the Maroons were of Spanish. I'll say descent, so to speak, because they were African, right? But they were enslaved by the Spanish. Therefore, you had a lot of Africans who spoke Spanish. But the Maroons, the Maroon culture, put it this way, the Maroon culture derived out of Spanish enslavement, whereas freedmen were blacks who were slaves, but were later freed, and they either paid for their slavery, they were given their slavery, or towards the end of the Civil War, at the end, slavery was abolished. They were granted their slavery. Granted their freedom. All right, so here's where you look at the difference here. So I typed in the distinct history of free Africans in America before the codification of chattel slavery is frequently overlooked or merged with post-slavery history of freedmen. So this goes a little bit more into what happened or how the two particular cultures, we're talking Maroon culture versus freedman culture, how they were kind of mixed and mashed together to whereas people were misquoting or misnaming who the freedmen or the Maroons were. The history of free Americans in America before the codification of chattel slavery was characterized by a permeable, albeit difficult social structure where some Africans held status similar to European indentured servants. Unlike the later antebellum freedmen, these early free residents often engaged directly in colonial, economic, and legal life, owning land, voting, and suing in court before racial laws fundamentally changed their status. So what they're saying is before the whole thing of slavery kicked off, you had Africans or the descendants of Africans who were actually living amongst the colonials at the time, owning, purchasing, voting, before the whole concept of, you know what, I could use a man like you in my field, but I'm free. You know what, it doesn't matter because so what's happening right around us right now, you can either come over and do this, or I can force you to and take what you have. Now, I'm being dramatic right about now, but that's slowly how things came to be, where people who were freemen lived under the threat of slavery, which in the end they succumbed to. Key distinctions. Status as half-free. Many early arrivals, particularly in New Netherlands, New York, and early Virginia, operated under a status of half-freedom. They were freed after working a set of number of years, often for the company or a master, and were required to pay annual tribute, called taxes, but they could own land and property. Now, this is similar to some of my earlier shows that I talked about in Africa or ancient Africa. If there was any type of aggression between two sides, even we'll say up to the 15th and 14th century, where Africans would be combative, they'd have their wars, and then after all is said and done, those folks who were prisoners of wars, there was a level of slavery, but it was more like indentured servitude. To whereas again, you would have 7 to 10 years or so that you would be in indentured servitude, and during that time frame, you would be taken in by your captor, but there was not this harsh thing of who's your name? Your name is Toby, not Kunta, or whatever, this type of stuff. You didn't have that per se. People were taken into indentured servitude either because they were criminals, they were captured in war, or they could not pay their debt. Something like that would get you into indentured servitude. But the thing was, at the end of it, you were free to go. You may have lost about 5 to 7 years of your life or longer, but still, there was an end to it. Now, this is what was practiced in Africa before, again, the colonizers came and changed the whole concept of that. But still, you had an aspect of that in the colonies before chattel slavery took place. But let's jump here. The shift to codification. The distinction between these two eras is marked by the deliberate creation of legal frameworks that solidified hereditary racial slavery, legal disenfranchisement. Beginning in the 1660s, colonies began passing laws limiting the rights of free blacks, including the right to own firearms or testify in court. Virginia slave codes. Virginia's House of Burgesses passed laws in 1691 and 1705 that restricted manumission, which is the freeing of slaves, and soon free blacks were stripped of their right to vote. Now notice things are going down. Does that not sound familiar about what's happening around us right now? Listen to this. The hardening of race. As slavery became more profitable, the legal system evolved to define all Africans as perpetually enslaved, separating the initial relatively fluid status of the first Africans from the later rigid racial caste system. So it just all started to go downhill at this point. I'll read this last part here. Distinctions from post-slavery freedmen. Antebellum free blacks lived under the shadow of slavery with restricted rights even in the North and faced systemic suspicion. Colonial free blacks in the 1600s operated in a vacuum of formal slave law, allowing some to be treated as black Englishmen, a privilege that disappeared as statutory slavery took hold. So don't let anyone tell you that blacks did not live amongst them prior to slavery and have equal access, or so to speak. But once that era of nobility went to the sidelines, anyone this shade of brown went into the fields. So again, this topic or this particular slide here, the distinct history of free Americans in America, free Africans in America before the codification of chattel slavery is frequently overlooked or merged with the post-slavery history of freedmen. A lot to say, but again, take a closer look at this and look for yourselves. Don't let anyone tell you different. Now, I did not want to leave out the aspect of the slave colonies in Brazil. Now, we'll get back to the FBA nonsense in a moment. But again, what I want to do is at least fortify you to let you know that slavery was not something that existed from Africa to America. In the beginning, it went from Africa to the Arabian Peninsula. And then once blacks were on the Arabian Peninsula, again, we're talking around the 8th or 7th century. But once blacks got to the Arabian Peninsula, then we moved through what is now Iraq, Afghanistan, India. If you ever look at these guys over there who have the same skin tone that I have, but had, as they say, that good hair, you know for a fact, yes, someone in his family was African, but they speak perfect English, or excuse me, perfect. What is it? I want to say it's Tagalog, or Tagalog, something along those lines. But still, they speak the perfect language of the region. They speak perfect Arabic. Anyone who is not aware that slavery or the enslavement of Africans has been going on for a good 800 or 900 years or longer is an idiot. Well, let me take that back. Let me take that back. They are not knowledgeable of this, but they will always say you're lying if you tell them this. Now, I can say that from experience. Heck, even today, with that little bit I showed you, that back and forth with this FBA guy, swearing that non-FBA people are stealing FBA's history, calling Dr. John Henry Clark a pseudo-intellectual. These folks are a cancer. I stand on that. Yes, colonial Brazil, 1500 through 1815, was a massive Portuguese colony built on an economy of enslaved labor. Brazil imported an estimated 4 to 5.5 million enslaved Africans, roughly 40% of all enslaved people brought to the Americas, primarily for sugar, coffee, and mining. It was the largest slaveholding colony in the Americas and the last to abolish slavery, doing so in 1888. What were the key aspects? Duration and scale. Slavery persisted for roughly 350 years, with Brazil receiving the highest number of enslaved Africans of any country in the Western Hemisphere. Drivers. Slavery was initially used for harvesting Brazil wood, followed by large-scale sugar plantation production in regions like Bahia and Pernambuco. Later, gold and diamond mining in the 18th century increased the demand for labor. Shift from indigenous labor. After an initial less efficient period of enslaving indigenous peoples, we're talking about the local Indians there, the Portuguese transitioned to importing African slaves who were central to the colony's economic growth. Now, there was something that Dr. Clark had said in one of his lectures. It went along, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, that outside of Europe, no European nation ever prospered economically without the subjugation of the local indigenous population. And if that local indigenous population did not perform like it did in the New World, guess where they could always go to get workers? That's right. The Africans who were brought from Africa to Spain and Portugal to be slaves were then shipped from Portugal and Spain to the New World to be slaves. Ain't that a bitch? But as I said before, this information is out there, and not too many folks in FBA have any knowledge of this. And I'm not surprised, because it's a vast network of incompetents who get their information from social media, whether it be YouTube, Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter X. And you've got a whole assortment of other disinformative websites, or you can go straight to the source, Tariq Nasheed. It's funny how this individual called Dr. Clark a pseudo-intellectual, but will hang off every word Tariq Nasheed and his followers come up with to try and give any credence to this whole foundation of Black American nonsense. Kid you not. Now, recall where we talked about there were failed Spanish colonies, but were there any failed Portuguese colonies? Were there any failed Portuguese colonies in America where African slaves were abandoned? Yes, there were failed or temporary Portuguese colonial attempts and abandoned sites in South America, primarily Brazil, where enslaved Africans were left behind, often forming, here we go again, maroon communities or merging with local populations. While most Portuguese colonization in Brazil eventually thrived, early 16th century endeavors and regional conflicts resulted in several failures. So I'm not going to go ahead and read through all of this, but just understand that you have, once again, blacks who were abandoned and left by the original colonists because of disease, because of poor management, starvation, revolt. But there were people, excuse me, who were left, or should I say, there were Africans who were left nonetheless, who then became a part of that local populace, and to which you have thriving communities and a large population of Africans as a result. Again, these are people who are part of the same diaspora that we are. When I say we, I'm talking about African American blacks, African American descendants of African American ancestors who themselves are descendants of enslaved Africans. We are all together, and the FBA may not like hearing that, but that is the case. You are not unique. You are just failed in acknowledging your history. What did I just close? Hold up for a second, folks. Let me go see if I can get that back. What did I just close here? Stand by here for a second. Did not mean to do that. Bear with me for a moment. Curious. Here we go. World's list of history. Okay. Let me see if this is it. So bear with me. I'm trying to bring up this page if this is the right one. Give me a moment. What I'm going to do here is just close some of the things that we've already gone through here. Just free up some bandwidth. Yes, we talked about Diop. We talked freshman paperwork. Okay, let's see if we can get this to come up here. Worst case scenario, I can just always go back out and bring up the information, which is what I'll probably have to do. What is there we go. I think that was it. My apologies. No. Well, we'll just continue on here. So basically, so there's a statement here when anyone asks exactly what is FBA's whole issue here, this rhetoric that comes from them. Where they ask the question, where do they get this mentality from that discriminates against other folks in the diaspora? Is what? Let me. I've got to get this out of my system. I don't like leaving anything half done. It's foundational. Here we go. What is foundational device? All right, here we go. All right, so let me bring this back in. Found what I was looking for. Close enough. So go back. So I typed in, why is foundational Black American ideology divisive towards Black immigrants? FBA ideology is viewed as divisive because it creates a strict lineage-based distinction between Black people with ancestors enslaved in the U.S. and Black immigrants, often accusing the latter of accessing resources meant for descendants of chattel slavery. Proponents prioritize reparation claims and native-born status, sometimes employing hostile rhetoric against African and Caribbean immigrants. There it is. This is that foundational Black American idiocy that I'm talking about. Carving out a unique and supposed specific identity, when in fact, all you're doing is creating a bigoted and divisive rhetoric against someone you should be unifying with, because we all have a common enemy. And that enemy is racism, perpetuated by Eurocentric bigotry. So instead of us fighting on the same sides, you've got Blacks who are fighting against the bigoted Eurocentric aspect, which is, the racism that these folks perpetuate and put towards us. And again, it's not all Eurocentric, aka white people. We know who the racists are. They don't hide it. As of right now in America, they are not hiding who they are. We know who these folks are. But then at the same time, we're trying to hold them off. Now you're looking over and trying to do this with the folks who are supposed to be united with you. So imagine pushing in this direction and pushing in this one also. Now here's key aspects of it. Lineage-based exclusivity. FBA has no lineage. FBA closely linked with American descendants of slavery defines Black Americans specifically by descent from U.S. chattel slavery, deliberately separating this group from the broader African diaspora. Competition of resources. Adherents often argue that Black immigrants are given preference by or assimilate better into existing power structures, allowing them to leech benefits or take up economic space that should prioritize those with generational trauma from American slavery. Now, remember, I just said here that at the beginning of slavery, we had African or enslaved Africans. And of course, these enslaved Africans slowly throughout time became African Americans. And even throughout this, these African American descendants who had enslaved Africans as parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, FBA tends to act as if these folks never existed. But as I also said, towards the end of slavery, the last batch of Africans showed up in 1860, which means that you still had immigrants who were part of the process. So anyone who arrived in America in 1860 as an African immigrant, by 4 or 5 years down the road, you probably still had Africans now who are speaking African once again, but who are having to mix in with the 8th, 9th, whatever 10th generation of African descendants from the original Africans who were enslaved. So again, at the beginning and towards the end, you had Africans, not African descendants, but we're talking about actual Africans who had showed up in America right before slavery is abolished. So FBA, miss me with your nonsense. Let's look at the hostile rhetoric and anti-immigrant. Some FBA proponents have been criticized for adopting anti-immigrant rhetoric, attacking Pan-Africanism, and creating a wedge issue that blames Black immigrants for the struggles of native-born Blacks. Do you hear this bullshit? Excuse me, but still, do you hear this nonsense? Fighting your own. Rejection of shared identity. Many FBA proponents reject the label African American, arguing it is a misnomer designed to sanitize their unique foundational role in building the U.S. economy, thus distancing themselves from immigrants who hold on to their national origins. Now, this is something that, if you listen to it, it almost sounds convincing, but then you have to realize something. Your national origin has never changed, African American. Even though you may have someone who comes over from Sinhalese, Some of these folks will call themselves Sinhalese American, but they're still African. But we all are in our DNA African. But everyone is so caught up, yeah, just being Negroes, just ignorant. Let's just call them what they are, Negroes. There you go. You got your distinct title. But nonetheless, being African American, I was born in America. Even if you have blacks who come over from some Senegal, who come from Ghana, Nigerian, you will still hear them say, I am Nigerian America. I am from Nigeria. Okay, yes. So he says he's from Nigeria, but he's still African. But in America, everyone says, well, wait a minute. Well, he can just try and pass as African American. Technically, he is. But majority of these folks still say where they're from. Yes, they're still African, but they will say where they're from, but they still, nonetheless, are part of the diaspora. Now, what irritates me the most is listening to these idiots misuse the phrase delineate. Since we're on that, or since I brought it up, bear with me just for a moment. Delineate. I actually threw this into an inquiry, into a search inquiry, so I could get something more clear and succinct. Yes. So I typed in delineation by definition centers around providing structure and clarity, not building barriers. So let me type this in here just to put this in. Delineation by centers. Clarity and not building barriers. All right. So again, it's always going to be the same but different when dealing with AI nowadays, looking for answers, almost at the sense of creating an answer. If you don't get the information that you're looking for, it'll add to it on its own. But still, this is close to what I had. Delineation by definition centers around providing structure and clarity and not building barriers. And the response I got back, a little bit different, but somewhat the same. Delineation by definition is the act of describing, portraying, or outlining something with precision. It centers on establishing clear boundaries to provide structure and clarity, not to create exclusionary barriers. And that is how delineation is misused every time you hear them say, oh, we just want to delineate from them tethers. Well, no, what you're now talking about is separation. Delineation is being specific. Well, what makes us different, that would be delineation. But saying that we want to delineate away from, you're now talking separation, which means that this is not delineation. This is separation. So keep that in mind if you see them misuse it, and call it out when you hear it. Get rid of that. So as I was saying, you've got this anti-immigrant rhetoric that is coming from FBA that is similar to the same thing that you would get from these far-right extremists, aka white supremacists. The exact same thing that is doing, again, the same thing, which is dividing. So again, any more information that you would like, just type this in. Look for that. So we discussed that. We discussed delineate. Let me move this back off to the side. All right. So this article that you see here, baller alert. Now, I brought this up in one of my previous shows here, and this was an article that was done, which I said before, which was a softball article, big upping FBA, what FBA really means. So there's no need to really go through this again because we've already discussed some of the key points. It is anti-immigrant rhetoric. It is um, divisive rhetoric. No, it is bigotry being um, expound against the African diaspora. That being the one from Jamaica, from Haiti, from the Caribbean, from Brazil, you name it. Anyone who is not American born black, this is who FBA rails against, as you just saw. Now, the crazy thing about this, as I mentioned before here, is where you look at symbols that they put together. Now, we've already discussed the majority of this in some of the other takes here, but this is the part that I want to discuss here. The movement has its own flag known as the maroon flag. Now, did we not just cover who the Maroons were? The Maroons were Spanish immigrants, black immigrants, immigrants that FBA says we don't want to be a part of our heritage, that takes away who we are because we are distinct. Bullshit. FBA is not unique. I said this before and I'll say this again. What FBA likes to consider as being unique about them is nothing more than variance. That is it. Because I can take FBA from wherever they are in the United States, put them anyplace else in the world into a racist, as I said before, they will still be another nigger. Therefore, stop wasting your time about this unique and rich experience that you do not have. That is the same experience that African American descendants have. I've got the same experience. So how can you claim yours is unique even if I am standing here as well? No matter how unique your existence you think it is as being FBA, you were still in chains like everybody else. Instead of worrying about where the boat dropped us off, we need to always remember where the boat took our ancestors from. Stop the nonsense. But again, going back to this, they have a maroon flag. It features 5 stars representing the 5 primary regions where escaped enslaved Africans formed independent maroon communities: Virginia, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Carolinas. The flag also displays an axe and a torch, weapons Maroons used during freedom revolts. But here's the crazy thing about it. See, this is how they are so incompetent in how they want to claim their history. They say that we don't want anything to do with none of these immigrants. Your whole flag is based off of that of immigrants. Again, the Maroons were Spanish enslaved Africans who escaped from the Spanish either through their own liberation or once the Spanish colonies failed and the Spanish colonists abandoned them in North America. Just outright stupid. But okay, hey, you got your symbol here. Right? We've got the maroon flag. Again, Maroons were Africans who were enslaved by the Spanish. So yeah, go ahead and celebrate with your maroon flag. You're celebrating immigrants. So here's an article that I came across that I want to include here. The myth of foundation of Black Americans. So again, a lot of the information that we've already covered here, it seems like we're going to be beating a dead horse. So this is nothing that I haven't already discussed, nothing you can't hear. But again, if you want to read more about the article, this is the name of it. But what I found here at the bottom is what was the most interesting thing, what I found about it. So again, this spoke of how FBA considers themselves to be separate and distinct in history, which again, they are not. They're doing nothing more than stealing the history that has already been established by African Americans with distinction. But again, they want to believe that it was them who built America. No, it was not. And again, blacks are not indigenous to North America. So we'll just pick it up from right here. This is where I thought was the most crucial part of the article. Again, if there's anything else of this that you want to read, you can go back. Here's the name of it. But for the purpose of what I've been discussing, being that I don't want to continue reading over the same aspect of this FBA foolery. So why is all of this important? Well, the FBA movement is using the idea of exceptionalism and what amounts to a kind of, and I mentioned this word before, didn't I? Pseudo-jingoism to divide on the false grounds that other groups of Black people are benefiting or will benefit from gains that are exclusively the boon of this exceptional group. Much of the discourse around has been engineered to create a caricature of African people who are looking to take something from the rightful heirs. And these biased and stereotypical characterizations are rooted in what can only be described as self-hate and anti-Blackness in many instances. And that is precisely what white supremacy needs and wants: divide and conquer. The work of white supremacy is to find ways to weaken and neutralize any and all peoples who are unlike and inferior to them in their own twisted imagination. Meanwhile, Pan-Africanism acknowledges a common enemy, and not only a shared struggle, but a shared heritage, traditions, and ideas that at the very least should make for any in the diaspora, even if not a direct genealogical link, most certainly a political one. So not unlike what happened with colorism or the simmering tension that existed between African and Caribbean people versus African Americans, FBA is doubling down on ideology that ultimately serves no one except white supremacists. And that is something that I speak of all the time, and I will do so, even upon my platform, which is kind of small, on TikTok. This is the crux of FBA right here: Black on Black bigotry. Believing that they are this unique and exceptional race inside of a race, when in actuality, these are the most marginal of individuals pretending to be exceptional. The common theme here is that they have no concept of history, meaning that African American is a new term that was coined in 1988, even though the documentation and the written history states that the term was coined back in 1782. Jesse Jackson did not create the term African American. He repopularized it, or should I say made it popular, but he did not create the term. Now, amongst FBA, you will have one side that said, well, Jesse Jackson made it popular, and then another side that said, well, Jesse Jackson came up with it. But neither one of them are cognizant enough to know that Jesse Jackson popularized a term that was already known in history back in 1782, if you read. So again, we're talking about marginal people with the goals of being exceptional, but are nothing more than idiotic. All right. Oh, look at this. Always at the end, I get folks who show up, but still I like it nonetheless. All right, third son, salutations. Glad to be here. Or should I say, I'm glad for you to be here. They also say Jesse Jackson was Cherokee. I mean, I don't know where this comes from. A lot of this, or should I say all of this, is born out of ignorance, and it is discussed inside of this same ignorant silo. I don't know where this information would be picked up, but I will say that I have no doubt it's someplace stupid that Tariq Nasheed got it from. So with that being said, let me go a little bit further here. We'll go ahead and, as I always like to do, make sure I increase the bandwidth. Now, as I said before, I have done some TikToks as of late that have picked up a good amount of viewership. And I've also gotten a lot of FBA self-tethering mental idiocy that has attached itself to my comments. I don't mind showing this to you. Matter of fact, let me go ahead here and give you some shout out here. But let me do this first. Let me go ahead and take this down because I think I've got it turned on to where I have audio turned off, and I want to be able to share the audio. So do share screen entire, but we'll do this with audio. And all of the audio should be off. All right, so let me know in the chat here if you get any reverberations or any overtalk or anything like that, but just make sure that you can hear it. All right, fair use, fair use.
Body, you know who this is. You know what we do. Let's go ahead and get it done. So I've noticed an increasing amount of Black content creators claiming to be about the African diaspora, going against the diaspora, looking for content that shows dissent and discord in Africa, and then coming back to their channel saying, look, how are they going to be in unity with us when they can't be in unity with themselves? Think about this. How often do you ever see your family members have an argument? Depending on who your family is. But once that argument is over and done with, they make peace and everything is good again, right? Why is it that we never see FBA or anyone else speak about our diaspora that way? All they do is look for dissent and then come back and claim that dissent is all that exists and that there's no unity and that we can never unify. We need to stop falling for this shit, people. All right? Excuse my language, but we need to stop. When I see programs like On the Shoulders of Giants or the African Black diaspora actively sit here and push FBA content while trying to hide behind the flag of unity, I know there's a lie being told. It was the same thing as Dr. John Henry Clark has stated. When I looked in the Bible, I couldn't see anyone that looked like me. Now, I'm not sure which Bible he was referring to, but still, the fact of the matter could be children's Bibles. And you remember in children's Bibles, there were pictures. But as a child, I had a children's Bible, and I never saw anyone that looked like me inside of it. So I can only assess that's what he is referring to. Even that being said, I look in the books of history, and I don't see anything mentioning FBA. I don't see anything about FBA being on the blocks being sold. I don't see anything about FBA being in the fields, working plantations. I don't see anything about FBA running away to freedom and then coming back to help others reach freedom. I don't see anything like that. And if you don't see that either, then that should tell you that something is wrong. FBA has no history. FBA has no legacy. FBA has no icons. All they have is this self-tethered ideology that they try to push on others to get us to believe that the history that African Americans with distinctions have established in the United States is theirs. FBA is nothing but a bunch of juvenile upstarts who seem to not realize that you can't walk into the scene and expect to sit at the head of the table with no sacrifices made. Holla if you're picking up what I'm putting down. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for.
All right, so put a 1 in the chat, whether it be someone actively watching right now, or even if it's going to be someone making a comment later on after the video. Just drop a 1 here if you believe I told no lies. Put a 2 here in the chat, or put a 2 in the comments if you think I lied my ass off. But being that it's still attached and I'm sitting on it right now, hey, third son. All right, appreciate it. I told no lies here. Go back in the history books and see if anyone was identified as FBA working in the plantations. All right. You won't find that. Anytime you ask FBA, provide an icon, if you could, on whether or not you have anyone that could be considered an FBA icon who has not already been recognized in history as an African American with distinction. All right, so someone, he said 2. Like I told you, you're going to find these folks here who are going to actually believe that they that they are exceptional and unique, and that they are the ones who built America, when in fact, no, you built nothing. If anything, to use their same logic of tethering, they have tethered themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinction, who are the ones who are actually responsible for the foundation that America is built upon. FBA has no history. They have no icons. They have no lineage. And I'll say again, Anyone out there calling yourselves FBA, name me one FBA icon who has not already been identified in history as an African American with distinction. Go ahead, pick one. All right, moving on. Now, here's another one that I did. Check it out, folks. Fair use.
All right, what's going on, everybody? You know who this is. You know what we do, so let's go ahead and get it done. You've heard me speak more than once about the foundational Black American idiocy that we find ourselves mixed up in as Black Americans. So when I listen to someone preach about foundational Black Americans, I have to remind myself that what I'm hearing is someone speaking the training from their ancestral slave father. That's literally what it is. Slave training that is still ingrained in them, that is being executed by them, to whereas you don't have to worry about massa being around because they taught the teachings and they taught the teachings well. Think about this. Who in their right mind will be proud to say that I can trace my lineage back to the slave master's quarters and a bullwhip? These same people attempt to, what I'll say is, usurp prominent Black Americans who've already set their mark in American history by claiming Thurgood Marshall, Shirley Chisholm, just to name a few names, are foundational Black Americans. No, they are not foundational Black Americans. They are African Americans who have proven themselves and have shown prominence that is recognized in the history of African Americans in the United States. So we've got to stop this nonsense that we keep hearing from these folks. All they're doing is breeding the same type of disparaging commentary and separation in us that you can get from anybody on Fox News, any Black conservative. I refer to that as them being Black conservative, comfort under plantation buffoonery. Remember where it is that we came from, because to hear someone say that I have nothing to do with Africa is the idiocy that you would listen to and think to yourself, what type of fool thinks that 100 comes before 50? That the cart comes before the horse? That your mother had nothing to do with your existence, which is pretty much what you're saying if you don't think that you came from Africa by way of your African ancestors. Never let it be said, folks, regardless of where the boat may have dropped us all off in our different sections of the world, we all were kidnapped and taken from the same place, Africa. If you like it, let me know, share it if you do, and subscribe if this is something you're looking for.
I say again, were there any lies told? Oh, if you look at the evidence, I told no lies whatsoever. So let's do this again. Put a 1 in the chat if you realize that there were no lies that I told. Put a 2 in the chat if you think I lied my ass off. And if you think I lied my ass off, put in the chat, tell me, where did I tell a lie? All right, so obviously, yeah, there's no lie I'm telling here, but I'm sure if there's any FBA around, I am lying through my ass. Oh, you say, Ford, welcome. Thank you for joining, man. And understand now, kings and queens here, really and truly believes that I am lying and misrepresenting. But for anyone who's been here through the show, I presented all the information. Anyone who's just not showing up, if you want to see this, I suggest you go back to the beginning, because we're getting ready to start winding it down here, because we've been here for what, almost 2.5 hours. But nonetheless, this information that I put here, as I tell people, I'm not going to tell you anything that I can't substantiate. But you will literally have FBA, which I'll go through a couple of comments here, who will sit here and say that I, as an African American descendant, I am stealing their history. Seriously, they will actually try and say that we of the diaspora are, at least those of us in America who support Pan-Africanism, are stealing their history. Now, I'm going to be clear here one more again, as I've said many times before here. This whole thing of tracing your ancestry back to slavery is nothing more than what they believe to be a flex. Again, this is that pseudo jingoism, all right, this fanatical patriotism, which in fact doesn't bear any fruit. As I said, and as I've shown, there was nobody in the fields during slavery that would call themselves FBA. And their history, oh, hey, like Third Son said here, they don't even know the history. No, they don't. They know the rhetoric that they've been told. All right, Third Son and EC 410. Check this out. As I mentioned before, at the very beginning of the show, I showed a few comments from a video that I dropped a couple of days ago. And I had an FBA guy who threw up 40 something comments through the course of the day. And as I said, this is what is known as gish gallop, where you just galloping and just gishing, running from one topic to another, throwing as many out as possible to make it seem as if there's something intelligent that you said, when all you're trying to do is play the wear down game. Like the guy thought he could bait me into answering all of his questions. So I picked one or two here that I could answer, or I shouldn't say I could answer, that I wanted to answer. When the majority of this was just ignorance for the most part, looking for some type of ground to stand on to say that, see, I can justify my FBA history. No, you can't. Now, when this guy finally came out and said that Dr. John Henry Clark was a pseudo intellectual, that was already enough for me to say that I'm dealing with an idiot. And there was something that Mark Twain once said. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but he said, never get into a fight or confrontation with an idiot because they will drag you down and beat you with experience. And that is a true statement. So when you hear someone throw something at you, hey, let me ask you something, you begin to answer it, and then all of a sudden, let me ask you this. You move to answer that, hey, let me ask you this. And they just keep throwing it out there. What they're trying to do is prevent you, number one, from refuting whatever it is, which is nonsense that they're putting out towards you. But the second thing is to keep you twisted with a whole bunch of questions. So therefore, when everything is over, I asked this man 20 different questions and he couldn't answer any of them. Well, ideally, that's because the guy, if he were to try to answer them, didn't have enough time to do so because you kept answering or asking different questions to try and create, again, this level of confusion or an air, which is false, of superiority. Look at all these questions I asked. Yes, questions that were ignorant to begin with, but you did not wait to have anyone answer in the event they could be refuted. Recognize that. Gish Gallop. All right, let's take in another one. As always, again, let me know if you can't hear anything. Afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you all who've taken the time to let me know that you appreciate the information that I'm putting out here regarding this foundation of Black ignorance that we're finding that is more or less undermining the establishment of history that African Americans have already put in place throughout history. As I said numerous times before, FBA has no history, and I will continue to say this. More important than what we need to make sure that we let it be known is when we hear ignorance such as "how's this any of your damn business?" You tell them promptly, you tell them succinctly. It became my business the minute you guys attempted to usurp history that is already put in place by African Americans with distinction, those who've already come before you, that have existed in this country decades, centuries before the concept of FBA or ADOS was even formulated. And to think you guys would be as brash as you are to come along with a history less than 30 years total between ADOS or FBA. Give it more, a little bit less, but it doesn't really matter because the thing is that the history that you guys like to speak of is not yours. It does not belong to you. It never was yours. But yet you attempt to walk in and take 240 some odd years of history that has already been established, that is already known as African American history, and try to displace it with this anti immigrant, especially Black immigrant rhetoric that you guys speak of, with tactics and speech that is similar to far right extremism, which can definitely be linked to the speech
and the activity that you guys portray. Now, take it any way you want to, but I've already said it and I'll say it again. You find one prominent icon in FBA culture that has not been mentioned and recognized in African American history as an African American with distinction. You can't do it. You never will be able to, because you have no one that would be considered legacy other than the legacy you're trying to usurp from African American history. I said this in another video and I'll say it here as well. I can't think of anything more ignorant than people claiming that they can trace their lineage back to an institution that was brought to this country and implemented by immigrants. This is that mental, self-tethering incompetence that is manifested inside your circles. And those of us who are African descendants of Africans who were brought to America will not stand for it. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do, and subscribe if this is something you're looking for.
Yep. Oh, check it out. Yep, I'm very familiar, which I'm glad to know that somebody else is. Just pointing out the absurdity of the claim that he was pseudo when their entire ethos, which I know you meant ethos, is rooted in ahistorical babble and pseudoscience. 103rd son. Now, I didn't take it as you did not know. I was just more or less adding to what you put out here, just in case no one else knew what third son and I were talking about. So as you see here, where's the lie I'm telling folks? Third son just said and verified the same damn thing I did at the beginning from that information that was presented on the wiki bio about Dr. John Henry Clark. Salute, third son. Salute for you also for knowing this. Hey, make sure that you get up with me, man. We need to look at doing some type of collaboration, because it seems that we're within the same wheelhouse, and there needs to be more collaboration for folks making it known about the true aspect of Pan-Africanism, but also knowing the people who champion it. And those like our master teacher who are gone still teach us every day. By the way, let me put this in here. So any gripes, complaints, whatever you feel, folks, if you're feeling hurt, as I said before, you have to look at what's being said here, not take it as an insult, but take it as information you may not be familiar with. But if you know this information and you refute it, then take it as you will. But I'll say this, as I always will begin to say at the beginning of each show, you need to put up your circle and ask yourself, is this something that I feel someone is degrading me with, or is this something I'm fighting because I'm unfamiliar with? As I said before, at the beginning of every show, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this again right now. If you're watching, put your circle up. Again, I got this from Dr. Ray Hagins. Inside of this circle is my anecdotal, lived experience and exposures I base my life on. Just because John says something I may not agree with does not make John a liar or me an idiot. It just means I am unfamiliar with what's being discussed. Anytime you start feeling heated about what I'm saying, put your circle up and give it some thought about what I'm expressing here. Again, here's my email address if anyone wants to have smoke with me or wants to ask more information about what I'm sharing with you. Now, I did say I was going to share some of the comments. Let me go back to a few of these before we close out, because I did say I was going to share comments and I inadvertently skipped over them. But let's get to this last one. Same thing. Let me know if the audio isn't any good, somebody. Fair use. All right, folks, what's going on? Now, you've heard me say this before, and I'll keep on saying this. FBA has no history. FBA has no right to reparations. So I want you to think about this. When we talk about reparations, we're looking at it from the wrong end. The place that we need to view reparations from is not from America.
where we've seen the damage that's already been done. We need to look at where it started. So as I've said before, FBA has never had anyone out in the plantations working. No one in the history of slavery would ever identify as being FBA. FBA wasn't in the fields. FBA wasn't on the run from the slave catchers. FBA was not there when the foundation for America was laid. So we look at where reparations really do need to start. It wouldn't be with us, African descendants of enslaved Africans who were brought here from Africa. If we're going to talk reparations, we would talk from reparations being done directly on the continent of Africa for those people who had their families ripped and taken away from them. That's where reparations would begin. And even in that instance, FBA would not be a part of it. So as I said before, FBA has no history. FBA has no legacy. FBA has no icons. FBA has no damn business discussing reparations, being that they have self-tethered themselves to the backs of African Americans with distinctions who have done all the work. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for.
Hey, I can't say any more than what I've already said. As my man over here, Deanna 1976 said, straight facts. Again, put a 1 in the chat if you're still there, anybody. If I told nothing but straight facts. Put a 2 in the chat still if you believe that I am lying. Oh, snap. All right, holler back. As I say, holler back. Third son, my man's. Yes. Now, where is Kings and Queen? Haven't heard anything from him just yet. But I'm waiting to get a 2 up in here. And if you know a 2 comes, it's going to be someone who said it before, or as I said before, haven't put their circle up. They have not put their circle up and acknowledged the fact that I'm not saying anything to make you feel ignorant. I'm telling you something that you do not know. But if you know or refuse to know, then I am not here to satisfy that idiocy. The facts are in, folks. FBA has no history, no legacy, no icons. Again, I've asked this question twice. I'm going to ask it a third time. If anybody here in the chat or who's watched from the clouds is FBA, give me a prominent FBA icon that has not already been recognized in recorded history as being an African American with distinction. Again, a Booker T. Washington, Thurgood Marshall, Malcolm X. You get it. These are folks already recognized in history that FBA attempts to claim as one of their own. Give me somebody in FBA history, which you don't really have, but give me someone that you believe is an icon that isn't already recognized in recorded African American history. Give me something, FBA. All right, now going back, as I said here, let me open up a few comments here. So high velocity. Now, I sent a message to him earlier, letting him know, hey, man, I'm going to be doing a live tonight. And I said, hey, if you wanted to get in on it, let me know. I'll bring you up. But I don't think he got the message in time. But hopefully, if he sees that, there may be a collaboration in the future. But here's something that I will routinely get. I will get someone who shows up and puts FBA or Foundation of Black American. I mean, that's just what it sounds like to me in my head. FBA. So I took it upon myself, okay, what can we do with FBA? All right, we have fumbled Black assertions, flimsy Black advice, forlorn Black attentiveness, feckless Black accountability. Let's go in with the classics, foundational Black assery, failed Black awareness, fanatical Black arrogance. You know, I'm just throwing this all together, folks, and just, okay, what can you do with FBA? You can do a whole lot if you put your mind to it. But again, rolling through here, here's something I could not make heads or tails, because what I've noticed with a lot of these folks who endorse FBA ideology, they don't have proper grammar. You can't really make sense. Oh, Yes. Fraud Business Academy. Oh, get it in, son. Followers being activated. Yes, sir. You know what? We can make a game out of this. Full of bad arguments. Oh, hey, get it in. Get it in. Failed Black agenda. Yes. Now, you get what I'm saying, third son, right? You know what? I think I'm going to put together a small pamphlet of everything you can do with the letters FBA. Facts, goddamn. Facts being avoided. Oh, fake brand activism. That's what I'm talking about. So you look in just a span of a couple of minutes. I almost want to say that third son has some of these locked on already, but if not, this is good. All right, this is excellent. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 here, almost 9. Let's see. For business always. Yep. Followers before accuracy. And here we go. Fear being African. I just saw this one today. Oh, yes. All of this is going to be written and taken down, folks. So again, if you have anything that you want to add to this, this is going to be a good, as the English would say, a good piss take. You know, having a laugh, they would say. Yeah, taking the piss. So yeah, nice, third son. Salute to you again, man. Way to come through with it. So, so as I was saying here, a lot of these FBA guys and gals just use zero logic or any thought process to what they're talking about. As I said before, when this guy said, well, Dr. Clark, you know, he's not a real doctor. So you're going to hold it against him, although his accomplishments have been accredited, because he does not have the official title of doctor. Although he did get a doctorate, it's unaccredited, but people say that's not a real doctor. This is not by an accredited university, but still, he did achieve his doctorates. But nonetheless, the information that he put forth is accredited by his peers and other academic scholars who recognize the work that Dr. Clark has done. He is accredited, whether FBA logic likes it or not. Now, here's someone else here, Big T. Y'all care more about the response to the disrespect of Black Americans versus the actual disrespect we receive. This is why nobody wants to hear what y'all have to say anymore. Y'all are purposely ignoring what FBA is saying to uplift y'all. Selves, same old again. Why is it that these guys do not know how to use proper punctuation and grammar? So of course I engage in a few responses here and there. You're deluded more by the assumed history FBA thinks they have, while failing to acknowledge you've tethered yourselves to the backs of African Americans who've done all the actual building of America's foundation. Notice the strong use of exclamation points. Now, I'm all for proper grammar and punctuation. The manner of FBA fuckery, forgive me, you represent is exceeded only by your self-tethering, incompetent mental logic. Signed, a Pan-Africanist. Of course, I got to get it in. FBA has no history. FBA has no icons. FBA has no legacy. Although I missed my no again here. Self-tethered menticide, which is what it is. FBA has tethered themselves to the backs of prominent African Americans with distinctions who have actually done the real work. Now, it is mad crazy to me that FBA will say, well, you're trying to steal our history, when there's nothing in history that ever shows any prominent person of African American background calling themselves FBA. Doesn't exist. Yeah, that response was too complicated for him to process, brother. I know comprehension does not seem to be a strong thing. It is lacking, and that is the one consistency I see, the inconsistency of comprehension. So I think that's all for that one. Now I think there was mad crazy responses here. So Carter was throwing a big ups to us, but he broke down a whole background of what Carter G. Woodson had to speak of regarding the miseducation of blacks and the education of being knowledgeable of our African past. So Carter killed it with his information. Forgot to give him some love on that. Keith saying the weird part is white people tell them all the time that they're African. Yep. This was me talking about a show. I think Third Son, you were talking about this. What sent you here, but this is from one of my other shows about a week or two ago. Here we go again. As I said, FBA. This FBA. And I put just the type of response I'd expect from one of Massa's self-tethering, mental extended slave family members. I mean, what FBA? As if that's going to signify anything or even change the derelict thought process that these guys engage in, right? Oh, check it out. I can say I'm proud that I trace my ancestry back to Aboriginal Black Americans. Here's this foolery again. There is no such thing as an Aboriginal Black American. I had a guy who was on my show about, damn it, you know what? I'm gonna give it another 5 or 10 minutes. Then I'm gonna land this plane and get out of here, get out of the airport. I had a guy who was on my platform. Forgot what he called himself, Leaping Lion or some type of lion, but nonetheless, this guy gish galloped for almost an hour and a half, maybe longer. I just sat there, thought, you know what? I just want to go ahead and hear this out and see how far he takes this. We went from, yeah, we ain't African, you know, we our own subculture. You know, we was here before slavery. My people, I can trace them, you know, all the same nonsense. As I said before, if there were any blacks on North American soil before chattel slavery, it was because they were either exploring with other parties or they were left behind from failed Spanish colonies. And even then, as a stretch, but it still happens, they made their way up here through their own means and, of course, stayed. And as I said before, any blacks on North American soil before, now we're talking about larger numbers, like the 100 that were part of the failed Guadalupe colony in 1526. These blacks, all 100 of them, ended up being abandoned and made their way into the local countryside and integrated with the local Indian populace. All right, so there's your black Indians, so to speak. And again, these were not Aboriginal blacks. These were blacks who were brought and left. You ain't taking them ninjas back with us. All right. Blacks are not indigenous to North America. Last point about this story. This cat tried to say that, well, you know, because blacks were over here when in 1776, you know, America became America, that made us indigenous. So yeah, because we were here when the Declaration of Independence was drawn up and America became a country, blacks were already here, slaves. So that makes us indigenous. You can't make this up. But again, apparently they can. Another name that I happen to have for FBA is I call him MNC. Woo! Oh, I'm sorry, I got to shake my head at this. We are Aboriginals. We are indigenous when America became a country. Because we were here, that makes us indigenous. Anyway, MNC, standing for the Magical Negro Coalition. And why do I say Magical Negro Coalition? Because these cats are notorious for conjuring up something to try and make it so. Again, imagine trying to turn shit pie into red velvet cake. Apparently, that's the FBA ideology. All right, we looked at this. There's only one comment there. One as well. So yeah, I think that's about it here, folks. Oh, almost forgot. Last piece here. Now, Dr. Clark would always say that history is something that we should not shy away from, that we should pay close attention to and understand every aspect about it because it tells us who we are, or more specifically, Dr. John Henrik Clark's favorite quote regarding history is, "History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is a compass that they use to find themselves on the map of human geography. It emphasizes history as a guide to understanding one's place and direction in the world." Again, there's a little bit more information to this, but feel free to check this out on your own. This is what you need to type in order to find said information. All right, folks, I'm about 15, well, hell, I'm about an hour over what I wanted to do, but you know how it is. When information starts flowing, you got to get it out there. So as I said, I don't expect to draw large clouds here, being that the majority of the information that is found by me comes from everyone going to the replay. So shout out to the replay gang if you catch hold of this. So I'd want to say thank you to Third Son and for all your FBA acronyms that we got here. A shout out also to Kings and Queens and whatever else here. Even though the information is quite piercing to you, it's factual. But again, I'm not going to push anything onto you that if you do know and you refuse to know, not my job here. But the information is still going to exist. And I believe we had one more person. Oh, yes, EC 410. Appreciate you for stopping by real fast. I'm hoping you're watching this in the replay. So what is it that I'll leave you guys with here? Because I think we've had a pretty good show. I want to say that facts don't choose sides. People do. Regardless of how you look at it, FBA is a cancer to our community. I will put 10 toes down on this. We are now facing in 2026 the resurgence of the South. The KKK has risen again, whatever you want to call it. Racism no longer is hiding its face. Why do I say this? People have the audacity to believe that Charlie Kirk stands in the same circles as a Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. Literally, that's what has been said. These are some pictures that have been drawn attempting to put a bigot in the circle of men who are working for the unity of all. And anytime the president of the United States flies a bigot's body on Air Force Two, that is in support of white nationalism. Anytime the vice president broadcasts a deceased bigot show out of the Oval Office, that is a sign of white supremacy. Charlie Kirk, and I'll just take a minute to say this here. Charlie Kirk was a racially agitating, racist, sexist, egotistical, lying, hypocritical bigot, otherwise known as a lying ass liar. He frequently engaged in what I call Southern strategy styled hate speech that was dressed up as legitimate political discord, which is nothing more than conservative theater and disingenuous debate. I put this, what I've just said about him, in the same class of the nonsense you see from the Foundation of Black Americans with their pseudo-jingoism. They have no history unless they steal it. They have no lineage unless they claim that it's theirs, which is nothing more than, again, the history and culture of African-American descendants with distinction. They have no icons. I've asked the question 3 times. I'm not going to ask it again because there's no answer that's ever going to be yes from them. I'll message you on the Clock app. We can connect there. I'll introduce you to my little online Africanist clique. All right, cool. I'm not sure what the Clock app is you're referring to, but nonetheless, you've got my email address or whatever you need to get with me. I appreciate that. Let's see what we can do here. But as I've said here, folks, there's no history. There's no lineage. There's no history. There's no icons. Ah, TikTok. Okay, got you. So again, do not for a minute think that we are not in a struggle. There's some people even say a war right now. We have watched the Voting Rights Act become completely decimated at this point, I believe. Nothing irritates and infuriates me more than folks not understanding that the 15th Amendment was something that was fought for to give us a voice to speak, the right to vote. And anytime I listen to a black person say, "Cuz, what's voting ever done for a black man?" Well, if you ever took your ass to the ballot box and voted, you'd probably see that. Again, it was a means of us to have our voices heard. And a good portion of us, being black skin folk, did not bother to show up for this because of ignorant nonsense from FBA. Yo, don't vote. No, show them until we get our reparations. No, we ain't going to be a part of their country, not part of this structure of theirs. Let them know, talk to them, let them know that they can't get anything from us till we get our reparations. And again, FBA has no claims to reparation because, again, these are for African descendants of slavery. And you have said that you guys are not African. You don't get any of this. Besides, African Americans, hear me right now, we were the last to get off the boats. So as I said in my video, and I say again right now, we are to look at reparations to be done properly. We don't look at it from the aspect of the descendants in the background. Yes, there should be something that comes from us or comes to us. Don't get me wrong. It might not be monetary, but nonetheless, it's something that still should be had. But if you were to look at reparations to be given, or should I say to be awarded, to be taken, however, the concept of reparations should begin in Africa because that's where all of this started. That is where the conversation of reparations needs to be had, and if anything, needs to be finalized because this is where it started, which is where, where we came from. We are the result of that crime. Therefore, the crime should be handled, and anything that comes from that by way of reparations should be first and foremost doled out to where the crime was committed. Put a 1 in the chat. Excuse me, I'm thinking TikTok. Put a 1 in the chat if you agree that if reparations were awarded, it should start in Africa. Put a 2 in the chat if you don't. Either way, that's what I'm talking about. Shout out, third son. Reparations begins in Africa. And then we look at everybody else first. Because why? Because nowhere in history did anyone not come from their mother first. For anyone to deny their association with their mother is like having an open hand across the side of mama's face and saying, I don't come from you. Master is responsible for who I am. Absolutely not. We come from our mothers. We came to America by our ancestors, by a way of our enslaved African ancestors who were taken from Africa, aka Mother Africa. Mama gets taken care of first. Again, I appreciate everybody who's stopped by. Third son, shout out to you. I look to hear from you, man. Hey, what else can I say here that I normally have not said before? If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. Thanks again, folks. I'll see you in the next show. I'm out.